For this video, I want to show you how to construct your final scene and add a motion path. We are going to animate 15 seconds of motion along a motion path, just to animate a camera along a motion path to reveal your scene. So I'm going to bring you step by step through that. This is the final scene. I've used that tree that I generated, and I've added some leaves to the tree. You can see that these leaves, this is all one model. Each of the leaves are a very low poly disc. Actually, I believe it was just a cube that I modified. Made it really thin and then duplicated it special to create kind of this branch pattern, and then duplicated that a number of different ways. Okay, so very simple. With my tree, I have two materials on it. I have a branch material or a trunk material and a leaf material. I think if I really wanted to maybe get fancy, I would add some texture to this tree. But the other things I've added are I've imported the robin that I created last week. And I did that by saying File, Import, and importing the model. And so with importing the model, it also imported the textures. It didn't necessarily import the textures, but you can see I have my texture file here. And it's under my week 3 folder. Even though for my project folder, I also set a project folder here, week 4, and my scenes here, the final scene, I've saved it under scenes, okay? So I've pulled my model from week 3 into my week 4 project folder into this final scene. I've also added a sky dome light, and I've added a ramp to that sky dome light. If we zoom out here, you can see that ramp, just to add a kind of sky-like texture to the background. And a number of direction lights, which you can see here, which are just, I can kind of move these out of the way so we can see them. They're just adding a global lighting scheme to my scene. So while I'm lighting my scene, and I'm going to be, working with my Arnold render view here to make sure that the lighting is working for me, and that the lighting and the materials and everything that they look good enough. Okay, I think that my render looks pretty good, so I'm going to X out of that. And now, in order to animate a motion path, animating a motion path, we first have to kind of address the timeline here. I said we weren't necessarily going to get into the timeline this semester, but for this final project, we are going to animate a tiny bit of motion to the scene. We're just going to animate the camera, but we have to set our project settings. So this timeline here, this is the playback timeline. This is the playback part of the timeline. Here's our buttons to play forward, backwards, jump to the beginning of the playhead of the timeline, jump to the end of the timeline. And then here I have my animation. This is the defaults, the animation start frame and end frame. And then the playback start frame and end frame, which basically means that my animation is 200 frames long by default, and my timeline is showing me from frame 1 to 120. I can kind of scrub through, or I could zoom into the timeline or zoom out. Okay. What I'm going to want to do, though, is click this little icon here at the very bottom that says Animation Preferences. And if I want this animation to be 15 seconds long, we're going to go with the frame rate, 24 frames per second. And if it's 24 frames per second and I want 15 seconds of animation, excuse me, I'm going to say 15 times 24, and that gives me 360 frames. So let me go ahead and set my playback range and my animation range, which will automatically go to 360. The next thing I want to do is I want to address what's here in the playback. It's fine to leave this playback speed at play every frame, but we don't want the playback speed to be free, which basically means, you play every frame when you're doing dynamic simulations, because each frame relies on whatever was calculated in the previous frame. So it's important for it to play every frame. But we want to set the max playback speed, meaning that as fast as it's going to go is 24 frames per second. We don't want it to go faster than that, or it will give us a false sense of duration and how long it's taking for our animation to run. So then here we have like looping once continuous, so we'll continually loop when we play it. But I'm going to go ahead and say save. So those are the things we want to set. We want to make sure we're at 24 frames per second. We're setting the animation to be 360 frames for 15 seconds. You can make it more if you would like. If you want it to be 30 seconds long because you have a lot in your scene, you can do 720 seconds. It's really up to you. But at least 15 seconds. And then go ahead, set this playback speed and hit save. Okay, so now you can see my timeline here. It's stretched to 360 seconds. I can zoom in or zoom out. And if I hit play, you can see that I'm playing every frame at an appropriate rate. So to make a motion path, you're going to use the curves. You can make a motion path as complicated as you like. You can use any type of curve for your motion path. For me, I'm just going to use a circle. But you can feel free to use any kind of curve that you want for your motion path. Please play around with it. But for me, I'm going to put in a circle because I kind of want this to act like a little bit like a turntable. I'm going to go ahead and make my circle a little bit bigger. And I'm going to use this to generate my motion path. Now I've changed my preset, my menu set here. Usually it's under the modeling menu set. Now I'm going to drop down to the animation menu set. And I'm going to go ahead and create a locator under create locator. And this locator is going to be the kind of null object, an empty object that's attached to our motion path, which will be the circle. So if I select my locator and shift select my circle, I'm going to go up to constrain motion paths and say attach to motion path. And now you see I'm here at frame 104. My locator is here at this position, but if I scrub through my timeline, because I have a circle, it's going to start and end. I think if I zoom in, you're not really going to, the numbers are going to get smaller and smaller, but here we have both 0, the first frame, or we have number 1 frame and number 360 frame that start and end at that same spot. And you can see it here when I scrub through. You can see that locator. Right, there it is. And if I press play, we can watch it play and move around our curve. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually attach a camera to the locator. Let's pop it back to the first frame of my animation. And I'm going to create a camera. And a camera and an aim will give me the most control without too many possibilities. I'm going to create a camera and an aim. And now, at the very bottom of my scene here, I have a camera group that's been added. If I open this camera group here, I have my camera and I have an aim that it's constrained to. So if you see, when I move my camera, it will always point in the direction, or rotate by default in the direction of wherever that aim is placed. So what I'm going to do now is I want this camera now to be on top of the locator, right? I want actually the camera to be the thing that is spinning around my motion path. And so I'm going to do that by attaching the camera to the locator. The reason I add a locator to begin with, instead of just having the camera attach itself to the motion path, is that if I wanted to animate, going forward, more complex scene, if I wanted to actually animate where the camera's position is at any given moment, I can do that freely while also still maintaining a relationship to the motion path. I would not be able to key, or I would not be able to animate any motion outside of the motion path to the camera if it was attached directly to the motion path. Because as you'll see here, the locator, you can see it for rotate and translate because I've added that motion path. Now they're kind of constrained, which means that I can't go ahead and plug in a value here and have it stick, right? It's gonna, it's constrained. Like these two channels are not something that I can manipulate any further. Okay, so for the camera, in order to put the camera at the locator's position, I can move it and try to position it where I want it, but there's an easier way. And that's by selecting my camera and selecting the locator. I'm command selecting both, and I'm going to say modify, match transformations, and I want to match the translation. Now you see my camera has jumped and matched the position of the locator. Now, if I press play, you know, my locator moves and my camera doesn't move. So to make sure that my camera follows the locator, I'm actually going to pull the camera out of this parent-child hierarchy of the camera group, and I'm going to middle mouse click and drop it on top of my locator. And now when I press play, my camera will follow the locator. Now it's still pointed at the aim, so I'm going to use the aim's position now. I'm going to put the aim somewhere where I want the camera to always be focused on. And in this case, it's going to be the robin. So I'm going to take again my camera aim and shift select the robin, and again modify, freeze, match transformations, match translation. Now the aim has jumped up to where the robin is. So now if I move my circle anywhere, you see that, you can see that line there, right? Here's that, the group is actually a constraint between the aim and the camera. But you can see here that wherever I move the circle, right, that aim is maintained. I just have to go back to the beginning of the play head here, and then you can see that it will always be kind of focused on the robin. So let's see what this will look like, right? Because if I press play, I can see the camera moving, but I don't see what would be rendered out. So to do that, I'm going to go to Panels, Perspective, and look through my camera 1 perspective, that camera I put in my scene. And now I can see it. I don't really love this color here. Let's get rid of that color because I can see it here, that white. We'll just leave it that kind of blue. Now what I'm going to do is I can see here in my camera 1, I'm looking through the camera 1. Jump back to the beginning. I'm actually going to make sure that with my camera selected that I'm locking my camera, because it's very easy to start to kind of pan and toggle and zoom around thinking that you're in your perspective camera when really you're in your camera that you're going to render from. So lock this camera. And also let's turn on our resolution gate so we can see what we're going to be rendering out. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's see what this looks like. And I think that's okay. One thing that you'll notice is that the motion path will automatically ease in and ease out. And I think we'll just work with that. There are ways to make sure that we have a continuous motion, but we're just going to work with that. I think though what I'd like to do is make some modifications so that I have a little bit more of interest going on in my animation. So let me put 2 windows side by side. Let's do 2 panels side by side here, and this panel will be my camera 1 perspective, and then here is my perspective camera. And let's see what happens if let's move this circle. Let's move it out maybe. Let's maybe rotate it. Maybe something like that. Let's see what that looks like. And actually, perhaps I actually want my start and end to be more towards let's see what happens if I do something like this. Let's see what this looks like. And make sure that I have my, you can see this little gray box around whatever viewport I'm in. The other thing that I just want to do really quickly is have a display layer that includes my dome light and my area lights. And let's add them to this layer and make them restricted so we can't select them in the scene. Okay, great. And now with this selected, collapse this, let's press play. And I like the way that looks. I'm kind of pulling out from the tree and can see the tree from a top view. I might even want to exaggerate it. I might, let's go to, yeah, somewhere where the camera is farthest away and see if we can't get a real kind of top-down view of the whole tree. So this is just going to require a little bit of kind of finessing. Let's go back to the beginning. And let's press play. Make sure that I always want to make sure that this little gray box that I'm prioritizing my camera's view panel so that I can preview. Now I'm kind of like jumping over the robin. Whoa, zooming around. Perhaps that's too extreme of an angle because I don't want my camera to flip like it did. So let's move it out a little bit. Maybe move it down. Just try something like this. Make sure I prioritize this view. Let's try this one more time. Okay, so I like the way that looks. Now what I'm going to do is let's render this out. Let's go ahead and save our scene. And now under my render settings here, go to this clapboard. And I want to render JPEGs. I'm going to name this final. And now under frame and animation extension, I want to render this as this last option here, name_number.extension.jpg, so that each frame will render out as a single image, final_frame number.jpg. Okay, my frame range, I want to make sure that I'm rendering out from frame 1 to frame 360. My renderable camera, I want camera 1, and I want my preset to be HD 720. Under Arnold, I can mess with these settings if I want, but that's what I want to set for my render settings. Now what I'm going to do is go to my render view here. I want to make sure I'm rendering render camera 1. And let's let it render. And then this will give us a good indication of how long it will take to render your final animation. And you should expect it to take, I have like a 2017-18 MacBook. Takes me about like 1.5 minutes per frame. So let's think about that. It's 1.5 minutes. Let's see what it says. I think it'll say about 1.5 minutes. So let's say it takes 90 seconds per frame times 360 frames equals lots of seconds, 30-something thousand seconds. So divide that by 60 seconds. Divide that by 60 minutes. So it will take 9 hours to render, which is quite a lot. Let's make sure that math is right. Yeah, so let's say it takes 1.5 minutes to render times 360 frames, yeah, divided by 60. So 9 hours to render. That means you want to re-rendering this overnight. And to get started rendering, I'm going to, once I'm ready, right, all my settings have been set, I've tested it. This is why making sure that things like the way that it looks in Arnold, making sure that the lighting is correct. You really want to preview this before you go ahead and render it. So once I'm ready, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say here, render sequence. Make sure that I have my camera 1. It's Arnold. The size is 1280 by 720, and then go ahead and click render sequence. Okay, do this at 8 o'clock the night, let's say Wednesday night, Thursday night, to render your scene, so you're prepared to submit it by Friday. Okay, so in the next video, I'll show you how to import all of our rendered images into Premiere to export it as an MOV.